everyone. Welcome. I'm Ebru, founder of DWB, Divorce and Wellbeing. Thank you very much for joining us on this beautiful evening. Before we begin, can I please remind everyone to keep themselves muted during the entire session with the videos off, please. Thank you. This session will be recorded and I will be sending you the link for the recording following the event. Our guest today, as you know, is Lesley Downs. Lesley is a relationship coach, couples counselor, personal growth coach, and psychotherapeutic counselor. Is that right, Lesley?
That's right. Yeah, it's a big mouthful.
Yeah, it is. It's impressive. And she has an extensive experience of helping couples and individuals to make their relationships and lives overall better. Right. Lesley and I met in February at London Divorce Fair, where we were both guest speakers. We agreed to organize an event together, but back then, of course, we had no idea we would be doing a virtual one following the lockdown. And here she is, and welcome, Lesley.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us when it's so nice and sunny outside.
Yes, I know. This will be a live interview, and you can submit your questions as we go along. I will read out your questions at the start of our Q&A. And before we begin, I would like to give you a quick 2-minute snapshot of DWB. At DWB, we help people facing relationship challenges, separation, and divorce to achieve a better outcome at a lower overall cost. In my working relationship, I adopt a personal and client-centric approach based on mutual trust. There are 3 main principles to how I work. Firstly, I work alongside divorce lawyers, family lawyers, to make the process more efficient and cost-effective. Secondly, I help people to understand the process and achieve my client's desired outcome by providing practical and emotional support whenever they need it. And thirdly, I coach people to help them make good decisions based on emotional stability and clarity of thought. As Lesley would agree, coaching also serves to empower my clients.
It does.
Thank you. In addition to these 3, I introduce clients to other professionals that they may need along their path, including lawyers, planners, and therapists who would be suitable for their financial and personal circumstances, as often finding the right professional can feel overwhelming. Our well-being group, of course, is open to everybody, regardless of their relationship status. Here, we try to create a positive difference by bringing like-minded people together through social, and these days, virtual events. Each of our events is run by fantastic professionals known to us. If you have any questions regarding DWB and how we help people, you're more than welcome to contact me privately to arrange a 30-minute complimentary meeting. If you happen to know somebody who may be in need of our services, especially during these trying times, please pass the message along. Lesley, here we are again, and it is a pleasure to have you as our guest this evening. I would like to start by asking you, what are the most common challenges that the couples face in your experience? And how has the lockdown affected this? negatively, or maybe in some cases positively.
The couples that I work with, I think the most common challenges that they come up against are usually to do with communication issues, that they just don't listen to each other. They have forgotten how to communicate together. So a lot of the work that I do is around helping them through different exercises that I do, to helping them to learn to listen in a different way. One of the problems is, of course, that when discussions start to get a little bit heated, that we can forget to listen because we're so busy up here formulating what we want to say next, whilst the other person's speaking, that we don't actually listen to them 100%. And of course, then, apart from the fact that we're trying to formulate what we want to say, there's also the bit about we're waiting for them to take a breath so that we can get our bit in. So we're concentrating on that as well. So I help couples to learn to listen. I think other challenges are that they don't prioritize their relationship. You know, as time goes on, you tend to let it slip a little bit, and then maybe one party feels that they're not being noticed, they're not being taken any notice of. So that can cause a lot of problems. And so again, it's about helping people to, my work is about helping people to express themselves, to be able to say what's going on. Obvious things like lack of intimacy is a big one that couples come to me with, that they've just forgotten how to be together. Your touch is very important in providing connection between us, between ourselves and our partner. And even you know, I'm not necessarily talking about sex. There's a thing these days that younger people tend to use the word intimacy to describe sex, whereas I believe that intimacy is something much, much more. It's about being together. It's about closeness. It's about taking care of each other. It's about celebrating each other's successes or helping each other if you're in a bad place. So yeah, and touch is an important part of that, even if it's just a stroke of the arm if somebody's upset. But couples forget to do that, and then they get to a point where they can't reinstate it. They're both scared to reinstate it. If there's been a lack of touch and lack of intimacy, then they become scared to replace it. So I think that's really important. I think couples just forget to be a couple, especially when they're bringing up children. You know, we go through these different stages. We meet somebody, fall in love. You go out, you're going out together, and then you start to, you think, oh, wouldn't it be great to live together? Let's get a house, let's get married, let's have children, and all these different things. You go through all these different stages. But actually, a lot of the couples that I work with have forgotten how to be a couple. You know, the statistics are that 42% of marriages in this country end up in divorce, and that the majority of those are in the 40 to 44 age bracket. And that really plays out in my office, in the work that I do, because that is the majority of the people that I see. Not all, I see all ages, but the majority of the people that I work with are in that 40 to 45 age bracket, and they've usually been married 10 to 12 years, which again plays out with the statistics, which I think is something like 11.7 years.
Yes.
And they have young children, and they concentrate so much on getting the money, paying the mortgage, looking after the children, that they actually forget to look after each other. How has it differed in lockdown? I think there's some good and bad. For some people, it's been good to spend more time together, and for some people, it's been bad. And I've heard people talk about, you know, seeing your partner who is normally really smartly dressed going out to work in their pajamas 24/7 is a real turn off. You know, and they suddenly start to see the person in a different light. So, and also I think it's about boundaries. We've lost a lot of, with lockdown, we've lost a lot of the boundaries in our lives in general, which then affects you as a couple. So we've lost that bit where we go out to work, we have a commute to work, which separates out our home life and our work life. And therefore, when you're coming back from work, you would normally perhaps have a 20-minute or a half-hour journey, which allows you to change from work brain to home brain. And now we're all doing our work in the same house, you know, husband, wife, trying to deal with the children, doing their homeschooling. Everybody's trying to find their space to be quiet, to be able to concentrate. Who's having the kitchen table, who's having the dining table. And I think that's just had an enormous impact on a lot of couples. I'm just going to move my computer slightly because I think the sun's shining in and I'm getting a funny shadow.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it looks better.
That's better.
Yes, yes. So I guess that brings me to my next question, which is, how do couples lose spark in time? And do you have any magic tools that you recommend to your clients to bring it back? Like a quick recipe, maybe some practical steps?
Well, I think it follows on from what I've just been saying, that we lose the spark, we lose that excitement about being together over time, and unless you prioritize that relationship and make sure that you keep the spark there and keep the magic going. You know, it's a common thing now that people talk about date nights, having date nights and things, but it is really important, because if all you do is just work and look after the children and make sure the children have got everything they need, but you forget to look after each other's needs, it can have a really big impact on the relationship. It goes back to, again, also to the intimacy side of things. And if that side of the relationship disappears, that can have an enormous impact on how you are together. So I do I do work with couples on how to put that bit of magic back into their marriage, how to start the intimacy thing again, how to touch. So one of the exercises that I sometimes get couples doing in my office is sitting up opposite each other. They turn their chairs around so they're sitting up close to each other, and can actually have eye contact. And then I get them to relax, take a few deep breaths. We do a little bit of 7-11 breathing to get them relaxed, and then I get them to close their eyes and imagine that they are blind, and then they take it in turns to just touch each other's face and to trace their face. So if you imagine that you are blind and you can't see the other person, just touching and feeling their nose, their eyes, their ears, how does that feel? And it doesn't sound much, but I've watched it in my office. I've watched people doing it, and it has an enormous impact, because one person will do it, and then when they finish, then the other person will do it. And it might be for 2, 3, 4 minutes, but the impact of it is enormous, because if they haven't actually kind of physically held or touched each other for a long time, just touching the face, just stroking the face it can be very emotional. And I've had people kind of just in tears because of the emotion that suddenly comes up just by feeling their partner's face. So that's just it's a very simple, straightforward exercise. And then there's other exercises that I give them for homework that that they can do. And again, it doesn't have to be of a sexual nature. It can just be kind of touching their arms, the bits that we see even with our clothes on, just touching your neck or touching your partner's arm or whatever. Just learning to stroke and to feel the emotion that goes with that.
Mm-hmm. We talked about challenges, and when a couple is faced with a challenge, it could be a big one, it could be a small one. Do you have an effective recipe to prevent it from becoming catastrophic, something bad and really beyond repair?
Again, I think a lot of this is about communication. It depends what the challenge is, of course, but I can't overemphasize the importance of good communication, of actually listening to your partner. There is a little acronym, and anybody who ever works with me knows that I love acronyms. So and it's LIFE, so LIFE, and that's listen, really listen to your partner and take notice and hear their point of view. The I is for making I statements. So rather than blaming the other person or telling them what they're doing wrong or whatever, it's saying, it's starting your sentence with I feel this, I want this, so that it's about coming from here, from the heart, rather than saying what the negative side of saying what the other person has done. The F is freedom for each of you to say what you want to say, to accept that each person has the freedom to have their own opinions and their own beliefs, and that to acknowledge those, not dismiss them. And then the E is just for kind of for everyone to win, to have that win-win situation where you both get what you want from it. But I think it really does come down to listening and accepting that other people have a point of view. But I also do stuff with clients about when they're facing a challenge, about going through, it's almost like a business term, I guess, with a cost-benefit analysis, looking at the problem and seeing what the challenge is that they're up against, and then talking to each other about what the options are, what can they do, and listing down, writing down all the different options. What can we do to face this challenge? How can we counteract it? And then talking to each other about the costs and the benefits of each one. So if you've through talking to each other, you've got 5 different options that you could do in relation to the challenge you're facing, then go through and write down and list the benefits of doing this option, or the cost of doing, or the negatives, if you like to use that word, the negatives of doing this option. So that, and you do that with each one until you come, at the end, you come to a conclusion of, well, what are we going to do? And you make a decision together to follow a particular road, and then do it. Don't procrastinate anymore. Just get on and do it. I think that's somebody's tagline, isn't it? Just do it.
Yeah.
but it's all those kind of different things that working together to face a challenge, and meeting the challenge head on, rather than just trying to to sideline it, and then it gets bigger and bigger. The sooner that you do something and you start to work together on something, the better, in my opinion. And I'm saying these as ideas and tips of ways that you can deal with things, but it's also the kind of work that I do with people in the office. I have my flip chart in my office. I've felt since we've been in lockdown, it's when I'm working with clients, it's like having my arm cut off, because normally when I'm working with clients, I've got the flip chart there, and I'm forever drawing diagrams and making lists and notes of what they're saying. So I would do the cost benefit analysis with them. We would have 2 columns, and so yeah, since lockdown, I don't know what to do with my hands, because I'm usually drawing things. So I can't wait to go back into the office and be able to have my flip chart back.
Yeah, I think it again brings the communication aspect. It's so much better to let the other person know how we feel about a situation or about the challenge, rather than keeping it all to ourselves and one day exploding. And I guess that's when things go to the stage beyond repair. So it's best not to get there.
Well, that's it, isn't it? That's it. It's about dealing with things, and the longer that we hold on to stuff, we're all the time, that's building frustration, it's building resentment, and then that comes out as a huge thing. The more resentment that's built up, it just all comes out. And then that's when it can cause conflict and problems. But if we develop a way of being together with a partner where we can express things on a regular basis, then it stops that frustration and resentment from building up quite so much. There's a great exercise that I do, communication exercise that I do with couples, which is called the dialogue, which really gets them to listen. And it works in the way that one person is the sender, one is the receiver, and the sender has to say things but in tiny chunks, so that the receiver can actually repeat back, because that slows everything down, brings it stops that, what I was saying about earlier, about that lack of concentration. And they have to repeat it back, and they have to check in that they've heard it correctly, that they've got the right words, that they've listened. Because very often we put different interpretations of words, and that can cause conflict as well, because it causes misunderstanding. So effective communication is about when the message that is sent is the same as the message that is received by the other person. So getting them to do this dialogue exercise means that they listen, they repeat, they check in that they've got it right. That means that they're validating what the other person has said. And then they ask if there's anything else that they want to say, because, get it all out. Let's have it all at the same time. And then I encourage them to offer some empathy. And that empathy doesn't mean I agree with what you're saying. It just means that I'm putting myself in your shoes and thinking about it from your point of view. So they might kind of say something like, yeah, I can see that would have been very hurtful, or I can see that was a big disappointment for you, or I can see that was hard for you. So it just gives that bit of empathy to the person who was speaking, that they've actually been heard and validated and understood. Even if you still don't agree, it makes you feel heard. And that is huge in the work that I do, is getting people to a point where they feel as though their partner has taken notice of them.
Yeah. What would your advice be to your clients who have the fear of being judged? Whenever they speak, the other person starts shouting at them or labeling them or blaming them. Do you deal with those sorts of clients?
I think there's always, we don't we all have fears like that? We all have fears of In fact, I do an exercise with clients about what their fears are, and I'll give them a big list of different things. So it might be being judged, it might be a fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, neglect, being physically hurt. And we actually go through it, and they kind of highlight the ones that they think are them, what's most important to them, what's their biggest fears, and that I get them to kind of put them into an order, 1 to 5, of what their biggest fears are, and then they discuss it between them, with me guiding the discussion. They discuss it between them, and how those fears affect who they are, because at the end of the day, most anger comes from fear. Conflict comes from fear. If we're afraid of something, then we react in a way that puts us into a conflict situation. So if we can find out what the fears are and how they impact on each partner, then you can start to reduce some of the conflict.
Yeah, makes sense. I will go to a different topic now. It's about sharing responsibilities as parents, especially these days. Most children don't go to school, therefore parents have more responsibility of homeschooling them, playing with them, because everybody spends most of the time at home. What would be your top tips to parents for sharing responsibilities in that way?
It sounds like I'm giving the same answer as to every question, but again, it's communication, isn't it? It's actually talking to each other about what's going on. I mean, I would say to people, sit down together and talk it through. Have a wall chart. Have something there that you can that each person can say, right, Monday and Tuesday I need to do these calls for work. So can you look after the children, do the homeschooling on those days? But the other person might then have Wednesday and Thursday that they do their work, and partner A does the homeschooling. You've got to work this thing out together. And lockdown has been, I know it's been a popular phrase, but it has been an unprecedented time. It's something that we never anticipated or expected, and we've had to work our way through it. And it for people with younger children, it's still not over. It's going to go on till September, so we've got a few more months to go. So actually working through what you both need to do, what work you've got to do, what other responsibilities that you might have, how you're going to deal with the washing, the cleaning, doing the shopping, and dividing the tasks out so that everybody feels that they're sharing the responsibilities. Because one of the things that I do with couples is get them to do a vision, a bit like in business we do. We have a mission statement, and we have a vision for the future and goals, what we want to achieve. So I encourage couples to do that for themselves and their families as well. And very often, if there has been some conflict in the relationship, very often the things that come out in those vision statements are, we think, so the idea is that they each write 10 sentences, and it's got to be positive, about how they want their relationship to be for the future. And then we bring those 2 lots of 10 sentences together, and they literally negotiate and compromise. In my office, they negotiate and compromise to put those 20 sentences together to come down to 10. That becomes their vision statement. And a lot of the time that brings out things like, we share the parenting responsibilities. We share the household responsibilities, the housework and the shopping. Because if one person feels that they're constantly having to do things and the other one kind of, says they've got to go to work, or they've got to do this, or they've got other more important things to do, then it's a source of upset and what we've already talked about, frustration, resentment and conflict. So having a vision of what you want to do and how you're going to share those parenting responsibilities. But I also thought, as I'm thinking about the question, I also thought about, I guess, going through lockdown has been, you could relate it to being a little bit like writing a co-parenting plan if you were getting divorced. You could think about all the possible scenarios that are coming up and how you're going to deal with them. And that's what I encourage people to do if they're separating, if they're going through the divorce process and they need to write a co-parenting plan. They've got to think ahead. It's not just about who has Johnny on Saturday and Sunday and whether they do alternative weekends and things like that, but they've got to think about how they're going to deal with all the different scenarios in life and have a vision of how they're going to deal with that and have it, a set plan. So I guess working through lockdown is maybe a little bit like that you've got to think ahead, you've got to work out all the different things that are going to come up. Okay, at the moment, the children are doing homeschooling, but presumably come at the middle to end of July, that will stop and they will be on some holidays. So parents will have had from March till July doing homeschooling and trying to fit that in. They're going to have the summer holidays to deal with as well.
Yeah. Do you think there might have been some benefits to lockdown in terms of, in a way, forcing the couples to work together and sharing responsibilities? Because it could be a very good foundation to build up on. Do you think?
I think there has been enormous benefits to it, because people have had to, they're locked into their house, so they've got to work it out somehow, but they've had to think about the children. And I do quite a lot of business networking, and I've heard people talking about how they can do this meeting from 9 till 10:30, but then they've got their homeschooling work to do, and people on networking meetings where children have walked past in the background and they sort of go, oh yeah, well, I'm sharing my office with little Johnny because he's got his homeschooling to do, so he's sitting on the other side of the desk for me. So I don't think lockdown has been all bad. I think
I agree.
For families, and it sounds sexist and I don't mean it to, but I know I've heard a lot of guys who said that they've really enjoyed it because they've got to spend the quality family time. They've seen more of their children in the last 3 months. They've spent more time with them. They know more about their schooling. They know more about how the children react and respond and play. So I think there has been an element of lockdown that has been good for families. Yeah,
I believe there's good in everything, so even the lockdown. Some people may be here a little skeptical about therapy. They may be thinking, oh, we've gone to a therapist before, it hasn't worked. So is it really worth giving it another try? What would be different this time? Or would it really save my relationship? What's your view on that?
Well, obviously, I believe in it.
I don't want to undermine your profession.
It's my career. It's my livelihood. I really believe in it. I think it's really important to when you're choosing a therapist, if you decide to go into couples counselling, it's really important to choose the right person. And if that means effectively interviewing 2 or 3 different therapists, I've had people who come to me who say, right, can we have a half-hour introductory session, and we're going to do that with 3 different people, and then we will choose the one that we think fits us best.
Yeah, that sounds good.
It's the same with all therapy, whether it's individuals or couples. The relationship between the client and the counsellor is a very important part of the work. And I always kind of joke with people, as is my way, that if at the end of a first session, if they feel uncomfortable, or if they're sitting there thinking, I never want to hear that woman again, then I'm not the person to work with them. It has to be a mutual feeling of, comfort, and being able to be in that it's the right environment, and then being able to think, well, yeah, I can work with this person. So that's an important part of it. I guess the other part of that question is, the way that I work with people is very I was going to say pragmatic. It's doing things. I tend to talk about relationship coaching rather than counselling, although I have to use the word counselling because that's what people search for. So to get through Google engine, you have to use counselling in your website and social media and things. But I think it is about coaching, because if you're struggling in your relationship and you're looking for some help, you're looking for somebody to help you with that, then it's about learning some new skills. It's about learning some new techniques. It's having some new tools. And those are the kind of things that I share with people. When I work with a couple, I'm listening to their stories, I'm asking lots and lots of questions, and I can be very direct. And I will ask people things and say to them, I'm going to ask this question, and it's quite personal, but that's because I can, because this is my job. I need to be able to ask these questions. So I think it's important for people to work with somebody who's got the resources. I will share things with people. I will give them new tools and techniques. I will get them to learn new skills in their communication. And I will always follow that up. If I've done an exercise in the session with them, they get a handout. In our previous life, of course, that would be a physical piece of paper. I give them with notes of the exercise that they've done and how they can go away and practice that. These days, I send it as an attachment in an email. So they've always got something to check back on. They've always got something that they can have in their hand to go, well, what was it Lesley said? Or how are we supposed to do this? They've always got a piece of paper. So yes, I absolutely believe in couples therapy being good as long as it's practical. And I have heard I've had people come into my office who've tried it before, and they said, that we tried a therapist, but she just let us argue. We just argued in the office, and she just sat there listening. And I was like, well, okay, I'm not going to do that, because you can argue for free at home. If you're going to pay me and you're going to come and work with me, why would I just sit and let you argue? I will listen. I will let people argue. If it comes up, I will let people argue for a few minutes, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, because then I can get a flavour of what goes on. I can get an understanding of what their arguments are like. Are they kind of hitting below the belt? Are they being unpleasant to each other? Are they being rude to each other? Do they use derogatory terms? I can get a feel for all that. So I will if something happens in my office, I will let it go on for about 4 minutes or so, and then I'll stop it, and then we'll talk about it and what was happening. So it's all those things I think are really important in having good couples therapy, because, as I say, you can argue for free at home.
Yeah, I guess one of the important things could be the timing, because you got to be ready for something. So maybe you weren't 5 years ago, but now you may be more willing to work on the relationship, and that does make a difference, doesn't it?
Both parties have to be willing and ready to do it, and usually there is one or the other who is perhaps a little bit lagging behind. It's the same as in divorce. If somebody suddenly says, I want a divorce, they've been thinking about that for months and months, but the other party has only just heard it, and they might not have realized that that's what their partner was thinking. So I think it's a little bit the same with couples therapy, that
I agree.
there's always one person, there'll be one person who is saying, we need to do this, and perhaps the other partner is saying, well, do we?
Reluctant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not sure about that.
Yeah.
And it's not unheard of for people to come into my office and sit there and say, I don't want to be here. Okay, well, why are you here then? Well, because they told me I had to. But this might sound a little bit immodest, but generally speaking, with a little bit of humour and some sharing of some information, by the end of it, the one that was reluctant, I've usually won them over, and they can see that there's going to be a benefit to their relationship by working on it. But it is hard. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes a bit of guts to acknowledge that there is a problem in the relationship and to work on it.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy path, but nothing good comes easy, in my opinion. You need to put a lot of good effort into something before it comes into fruition. So,
But the
I'm
results can
supportive.
be absolutely fantastic.
Of course. And it affects the children in return. I think that's one of the greatest benefits of receiving therapy, if couples need to, because one of the most detrimental things for a couple is the children being damaged, unfortunately, and that's something I see very often. And people don't even realize, because they think children won't be affected by the adverse sort of communication at home, but unfortunately they tend to be the ones who are the most vulnerable. So it's something taking into consideration.
I think parents, parents need to sort of think of themselves that they are the role models. They are modeling life for their children, and that's all of us. And I've been a parent. I've got 2 grown-up children, and I wish I knew then what I know now, because we don't realize what impact we do have on them. And I get lots of people who sit there and say, oh yeah, but we never argue in front of the children. Oh, okay. But they're arguing downstairs and the children are sat upstairs crying their eyes out because they can hear mummy and daddy shouting and screaming at each other. So we need to teach children how to be. I do work with people on how they calm themselves. So one of the things I do is getting people to understand where they are on a scale. So if you had a sliding scale between my hands, when 0 is completely calm and 10 is what I call is a toys out of the pram job. It's a really, you're really angry, you're really upset. And I get people to assess themselves on that scale in that moment when they're in my office. Where are you now? How much emotion have you got in you? How much anxiety have you got in you? Where would you put yourself on that scale? And people will kind of sit there and go, oh, I think I'm a 5, or I think I'm a 6. Or if they're feeling quite anxious about coming into work with me, they might say, oh, I'm a sort of 7 or an 8 at the moment. For us to have logical discussions, we need to be 5 or below on that scale. If you're in the 7, 8, 9, 10, your brain is in such a state of arousal, you're so frazzled that you can't have a logical discussion. And that's when the conflict comes, and the upset and the anger and the shouting and screaming. So you need to know, if you're up in that top part of the scale, you need to know how to calm yourself down. And one of the sad things is that we're not taught this as children. And I personally believe that there would be a lot less problems in schools if, as parents, we taught our children how to calm themselves, how to soothe themselves. And very often I say to somebody in the office, I'll say, well, how would you soothe yourself if you're up there at an 8? How do you soothe yourself? And it's, I don't understand what you mean. So knowing how to calm yourself down, knowing how to get yourself down to that below 5. That might be going for a walk, it might be going for a run, it might be having a bath, having a shower, reading a book, listening to a particular piece of music. But knowing yourself and knowing what calms you down is an absolute resource for you. And if we can take that and give it to children as well, so that when they get upset and they get angry, that they know how to calm themselves down from a very young age, they've got a resource for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. Is there anyone who wants to ask questions to Lesley? Because we're coming to the last 10 minutes of our session. So if anyone has questions, please type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screens. And in the meantime, I got a question to the anonymous box that I used for this event. And it was about how can I save my marriage? I guess you've covered most of it, but is there anything that you would like to emphasize while our attendees are maybe typing questions?
How can I save my marriage? Well, yeah, all of the above, I think, all the stuff that I've been talking about. Accepting that there is a problem, and then doing something about it, whether that's working with a professional, reading books, watching videos. There's loads of resources on the internet. But doing something, actually taking a positive step and acknowledging that there is a problem, I think is the biggest one. Because most of the time, people who call me can say, well, I didn't really understand how to, that there was such an issue. I thought it was just a little argument, but it's been festering, and as we spoke earlier, building that frustration and resentment for many years. So I think acknowledging the problems and then doing something about it is the most important thing, and then all the other things that we've been talking about. There was something like flashed up, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
Can you read it to me?
I have 2 questions here, actually. Yes, I'm gonna read it. The first question is, hi, how can you initiate intimacy when you've not been forthcoming with it for years?
Okay. So that, who was that?
That's Naomi.
Naomi. So Naomi, were you? I'm just wondering whether Naomi was on the call when I was talking about intimacy and touch and the exercises about touching your face and touching.
I think she was. Yeah, she attended earlier. Yeah.
Okay. So
She says yes.
okay. So that you. It's scary when you haven't had intimacy for a long time. It is scary. So we have to break down the barriers first. And I think the kind of exercises that I described earlier, where you just you learn to just touch, you start to build the connections. They're really important because you can't go from 0 to 10 in one go. If you haven't had any intimacy, there hasn't been any physical relationship for a number of years, it's just won't work if you just suddenly say, oh, let's go and jump into bed together. That's not going to work. So you've got to build it up slowly, and it's about building the closeness and building that sense of belonging to each other that is really important to start off with, building those connections back up, because I think that's what happens is over time, intimacy sort of tends to dwindle off over a period of time, and then people are too scared to kind of to start it up again. Or what if I get rejected? What if I try something? I can see that Naomi's, I
Yes.
think that's part of my problem. Both my children were conceived via IVF, and Naomi, yeah, I've worked with people and who have conceived children by IVF, and I think one of the problems is that during the process of IVF is that sex becomes mechanical. It becomes a functional thing rather than a pleasure, because you're doing it to try, you're trying to achieve something all the time, and then it just becomes functional. So you've got to put the playfulness back in, and that's not easy if it hasn't happened for a long time. But building the connections between you, building the playfulness again, so that excuse me, I've obviously been talking far too much, my voice is going. Building that connection, building the playfulness, and building the closeness between you is the first part of it. Is that okay?
Yes, I have the next question from Thomas, who is saying, what is your success rate in saving the marriage?
I would say my success rate is very high. Most of the couples that I work with are, when they decide to finish working with me, it's usually because they have learned enough and they've got enough resources and tools that I've shared with them that they know what to do. You can't expect the marriage to be perfect going forward. There's always going to be problems. We evolve as people all the time, every day, by the things that happen to us. And at the same time, our relationships evolve, because if we're evolving as people and there's two people in the relationship, then that relationship is going to evolve as well. So things will always change. But if people have worked with me over a period of time and they've taken on board what I've taught them, and they've learned how to use the tools, learned the new skills that I've given them, they've got the resources then. And then when something does start to go wrong, they can say, oh, we know what to do. So I think my success rate is very high. Very, very rarely do I have people who bail out, who stop working with me before we get to that point.
That's excellent. I have a question from Jackie, saying, is it more challenging to work with couples with young children or whose children have grown up and left home. Would you agree there are significantly different dynamics in the two scenarios?
Obviously they're two very different scenarios. Working with people who have young children at home is very often, as we were talking earlier, about not prioritizing the relationship, because the focus is on the children. We must do everything for the children, and they forget to be a couple. So that's one scenario. At the other end of the scale, you've got the people whose children have left home, and they've used the children. The children have been their glue that keeps the relationship together for many, many years. And so very often what happens when the children leave home, you've got two mature adults who are left in the house, and what do we do now? We've spent the whole of the last 20 years focusing on these people and not each other. So what do we do? And the term empty nesters, people can find it very difficult to be in that relationship, because they've got to get to know each other again. They've got to talk to each other. They've got to think about, well, are we going to do stuff together? Are we going to do it separately? And I think that, very often, if they've spent 20 years saying, right, well, I will take Johnny to football on Saturday morning, and you do the ballet class on Wednesday evening, and you do this, and they don't spend time together, and all of a sudden they're in their house together, just the two of them. So they're very different scenarios. But I think both comes back to communication, it comes back to prioritizing your relationship, and it comes back to building the intimacy up again.
I think these are all the questions we got so far. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Lesley? I think because we're coming to the end.
Only to say, if you like what you've heard today, or what I've been talking about, or you think it's useful, please do pop over to my website, which is just my name, www.lesleydowns.co.uk. There's lots of resources on there. There's lots of videos. I had the honour of being able to do a TEDx talk at the end of last year, which was published in January this year. So you can find that. That's on the TEDx YouTube platform, which talks about something which we haven't mentioned today, which is the impact of technology on relationships, and how that creates, our use of phones, tablets, laptops, emails, how that creates a lot of suspicion and resentment in relationships. So there's all sorts of, if you pop over to the website, there's all sorts of tools and resources on there, videos about points. And there's another webinar which I did about 3 or 4 weeks ago, which was recorded, so you can jump onto the recording of that, which again has perhaps more detail of some of the things that I've mentioned today. And there's sort of more notes, there's screenshots, and some of the acronyms that I use, the tools that I use. There's more detail on there.
Excellent. Well, we're welcome to receive any feedback from our guests. Please email to me, and we can do another session with Lesley, because I've really enjoyed this one. Feels like I can't get enough of you, Lesley. And the recording will be shared via email following the event. So even if you were a bit late to attend, no problem. You can catch up on us, and you please feel free to contact us if you have any additional queries. Thank you very much for attending on this beautiful summer's evening, and hope to stay in touch. And thank you, Lesley. Thanks for being with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for everyone for attending.
Okay.
It's great.
Thank you. Take care. Stay
Okay,
well.
bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.